We're going to be going live here in about, I guess, 8 minutes, and I'm just doing a little test. Can you hear me? Is the audio coming through okay? Laura, if you can hear me, or if you can't, let me know. Um, Let me know, and hopefully I can make an adjustment and figure out what's going on. Oh, good. Laura says everything is good. Okay, good. I'm going to go back on mute and wait for a few minutes. Okay, here we are, 1 o'clock Central Time. And my name is Dan Krause, and I am an estate planning and elder law attorney in Wisconsin. Today I happen to be at my Oregon, Wisconsin office and coming to you through the magic of Facebook, or if you're watching this later, the magic of video reproduction. And today we're going to be talking about the boogeyman at the end of life. I've got a slide presentation for you that I'm going to use, and I just want to let you know that there is a way to give comments here and put comments in the Facebook stream. And if you do want to give comments, I'm not exactly sure how it works, but hopefully there's a button or a space that you can just type in, and I can't talk or hear anybody, but I certainly can be cognizant of the comments. And if you have any questions or comments, I will be happy to try to answer any of those. Sometimes in the middle of the presentation, if it makes sense, or at the end, we can address those. The presentation, it has an hour time limit, although we may not go that long. If we get to the hour, I do need to drop off though, and end this because I do have another appointment, just so everyone knows. I have learned better how to use this format. If you've been here before, you've seen that it's just been my face because there was technical difficulties at the beginning. I was trying to figure out how to show my slides and I couldn't figure out how to do it, so I think I've got it now, and you should be seeing my face on the left hand side of the screen and the slides on the right hand side, although I can switch back and forth to just me or just the slides, which probably is more interesting. So that's just something a little bit new about today's webcast or broadcast or whatever you want to call this. So just a little bit about me. I'm an estate planning attorney. I practice in Wisconsin, though I'm also licensed in Illinois and Minnesota, and occasionally do some work for people in those states, but mainly my practice is in Wisconsin. We have locations in Oregon, Wisconsin, which is where I'm at right now, Brookfield, Wisconsin, which is near Milwaukee, and Madison, Wisconsin, our wonderful state capital. So what is the boogeyman at the end of life? Well, of course, death is a big boogeyman that many people are afraid of, but there's one thing that many of my clients are afraid of even more than death, in fact. At least that's what they say. And so let's talk about what that is. Well, here's just here's a brag screen of all the things that I'm involved in and some kudos I've gotten. I'm very proud of our 5-star ratings on Google and our A+ Better Business Bureau score and other things. Also, I've written a book, Estate Planning in Wisconsin, Privacy Protection and Taking Control. That's available on Amazon if you would like to purchase for, I think it's $14.95. It's about 90 pages long. It's written simply in not too small a font. It's not lawyerese. It is an easy read, and many of my clients have said it's very helpful for understanding basic tenets of estate planning. So here's the reveal. What is the boogeyman? The nursing home. Many, in fact, I would say most of my clients, when we talk about it, say that instead of going to a nursing home, they would rather be able to die at home. That's very understandable, and I think many of us share that idea. But the truth is that nursing homes, most of them are really not very bad places. They are making the best of the worst situation, where it's perhaps impossible for a person to be cared for at home within that person's means. So they need to go to a place where there are people who can then take care of them and monitor their medications and help them out of bed, help them to remember things, etc. So it's not always the nursing home itself that's the boogeyman, but sometimes it is a combination of the nursing home and the fact that you have to pay out of your pocket, and oftentimes it leads to poverty and helplessness. When a person doesn't have any more financial means, they are reliant on other people and rather helpless for themselves. So some of the dangers, I want to talk about some of the dangers of getting older. Alzheimer's disease, Lewy body dementia, these are all conditions that you might have. Feebleness of old age is just a general thing. These are things that you might get. I hope you don't, but they could lead to the need for nursing care. Some other dangers of old age, and sometimes even younger age, are cancer, kidney disease, and heart disease. Now, the screen here is different than the screen here. Does anybody remember Sesame Street when they say one of these things is not like the other? Well, I'm not going to make you guess what's the difference between these diseases and this disease. I'm going to tell you. But it has to do with inequality in the U.S. healthcare system that results in discrimination. Discrimination based on what disease or diseases you might have as you age. So, the diseases that we talked about first and the diseases that we flashed up on the screen second are treated differently by the U.S. healthcare system, specifically by, well, almost all medical insurance, whether you're young or old or whether it's Medicare, they all treat outpatient and inpatient care and sometimes drugs. Now, outpatient is care that you walk into the clinic, you get the care, and then you walk out. Inpatient care is when you go into the hospital and you reside there for a time while you're being treated, and then you get discharged. Now, these services are usually paid for mostly by insurance or Medicare. Medicaid pays for long-term care. Now, that's not when you walk into the hospital and you stay for a few days or maybe even months and get discharged. This is where you go into a place or you remain at home, but you need this ongoing care and you're expected to need it for the rest of your life. You're not expected to recover your ability to care for yourself. That's the difference. So the Medicare is something that we get through the Social Security system, and it comes along with your Social Security. It's not exactly congruent with Social Security, but essentially when you reach the age of 65, you qualify for Medicare and you should sign up, or most people should. You should talk with a Medicare specialist about when you should sign up or whether you should delay signing up. But for most of us, when you're almost 65, you should be signed up for Medicare. Now, it doesn't matter how much money you have or how little money you have, as long as you've worked in the U.S. system and are a legal resident or a citizen, you will be able to get Medicare. Medicaid is, on the other hand, even though it sounds like Medicare, it is not automatic. It is a needs-based program. Now, needs-based program means that you have to need it. You can't afford it yourself. And there's some very strict rules about who they believe can afford care and who can't. Essentially, what the rule is you have to go broke before you can qualify for Medicaid. So while I'm talking, if Laura, would you just let me know the audio is still good, that everything is coming through okay? Just a little something in the chat. All right, I will continue. All right, so here's where we talk more about the government discrimination. Now, some things that Medicare pays for because they're inpatient or outpatient are cancer treatment, heart transplants. These are some very, very expensive things, or they can be millions of dollars, in fact. Um, but like I say, you don't have to go broke before your government program, Medicare, kicks in and starts paying. Now, on the other side of this table, the screen, are the ones that you go broke. Alzheimer's disease is generally treated not in the hospital, but in a long-term care facility, sometimes at home for a while until it gets to be a point where no one can take care of you, or if you live by yourself, it's sooner than that, in which case you have to move to a facility. Sometimes it's a nursing home, but sometimes it's assisted living, a memory care facility, which is a type of assisted living. Um, and you have to pay out of your pocket. Parkinson's disease, COPD, if it gets bad enough, is something that you don't get better from. So it's a long-term care type of illness, etc. So, how do we avoid the discrimination that the government imposes on people with certain diseases? So before we go into that, I just want to re-emphasize why I say it's discrimination. We can't choose very easily how we're going to go out or what illnesses or maladies we're going to have when we get older. And unfortunately, we can't choose what Medicare is going to cover and what Medicare is not going to cover. So the government has decided that Medicare is going to cover certain things and is not going to cover other things. And if you have the bad luck of getting the things that Medicare does not cover, then you're being discriminated against because you paid in the same amount as the person who needs the heart transplant, but you're not getting the government care that you deserve. That is how I feel about that. And I am happy to help people to try to get that care without going broke. So, some concepts to know about regarding Medicaid. The typical government plan for a person is that if they have one of these illnesses or the need for long-term care, they spend down. So they have to spend down their assets until they reach the asset limit that's allowed for you to qualify for Medicare or Medicaid. Sorry, I even get those two mixed up sometimes. So what you're allowed to keep is $2,000. Now that's all of your investments, that's all of your bank accounts, that's any cash that you have in your pocket, $2,000. You get to keep your home. You get to keep one car. Even if it's a couple, you only get one car before one of you can qualify for Medicaid. The other one is counted against you. You can have as much burial insurance as you want. So a lot of people call that prepaid funeral. You can have a funeral trust up to $15,000. And then pretty much all of your household items and furnishings you can keep. Now, the good news of, oh, you can keep your home gets to be some kind of bad news in the next section, because then we have the estate recovery. This is after death of the person that receives Medicaid benefits that pay for the nursing care. Wisconsin and many other states have an estate recovery program that collects against all the assets that are under the control or ability for the deceased person to access. This means they can collect against life insurance that's supposed to go to your children. The state can get that if you owe after Medicaid has paid for your care. They can go after a house that's in a revocable living trust. They can go after your IRAs or 401ks if you had any left. They can go after a life estate interest if you had a life estate and the life estate ends at the date of death, but the real property that you were transferring through the life estate to your kids, they can collect against the life estate. They usually do not take your car. That's why I put maybe there. But it's bad news. So let's talk about countable assets. Now, when that $2,000, um, when we're talking about you can keep $2,000, that's a little more complicated, and it's a larger number when we're talking about a couple. Now, a couple where both people need Medicaid, they can keep up to $3,000. But if only one person needs Medicaid, and this changes year by year, the other person can keep up to $148,000. So it all depends on how much they start with. That's more than we're going to go into today, but the $2,000 is if you're a single person and you need Medicaid. So what's countable? Essentially everything that's not your house or your car or your burial account or your household goods and furnishings. Spend down. That is the time period and the action of spending before you qualify for Medicaid. So if you need long-term care, you have to spend down. And you don't have to spend it all on your care. You can spend it on other things as long as it's not a gift. And then estate recovery is another concept, which is when the state comes to get your house or any other thing after your death to repay Medicaid. Divestment, otherwise known as gifting, is getting rid of stuff so that you don't have it, so it's not a countable asset. That goes along with the look-back period. Now, look-back period is right now 5 years. And that is where the state, if you want Medicaid, they look 5 years back in your history to see whether you've given any gifts or divested. And if you have, then there's a penalty. So gifting is not the easy way to get Medicaid. Is just to give everything away to your kids. You will get penalized for that. Then we oftentimes talk about the needy spouse or the Medicaid spouse. That's the spouse who needs Medicaid if we're talking about a couple. And then the community spouse. And this can also be a little confusing unless you know the definition. It's just the spouse that doesn't need Medicaid. I think it started from the spouse that lives within the community, and then the other spouse lives within the care facility. Although that was back when Medicaid only applied to people who needed nursing care. Now Medicaid can apply to people who need long-term care at home or in assisted living facilities or group homes, etc. So the needy spouse and the community spouse. The community spouse resource allowance. Now, the community spouse resource allowance in different states is different amounts. Now, we're focusing on Wisconsin, so the community spouse is allowed to keep $50,000 up to $148,000. Now, how do we determine how much they get to keep? Well, the answer is, what did you start with? You get to keep half of what you started with a maximum of $148,620 and a minimum of $50,000. So if you start with 70, you take half of that, it's 35, but it's less than 50, so you get to keep 50 out of the 70,000 that you started with. If you start with 100,000, you're able to keep 50,000 because that's half of what you started with. If you start with 120,000, you're allowed to keep 60,000 for the community spouse. So that's beyond the non-countable assets. You're allowed to keep 60,000 in that case, countable assets for the community spouse. So you have to have about 300,000 countable assets to start with in order to keep the maximum $148,620 in Wisconsin. So what's the cost of nursing care? And this is a big part of the Boogeyman. $13,000 a month in Dane County, approximately. Now, some places are more, some places are less than that. So that's about $156,000 per year, and it's climbing fairly fast. 5 years is $780,000. You can see how many people go broke by going into a nursing facility. there is insurance that will pay for long-term care, including nursing care, um, depending on what your plan says, how much your benefit is. There's always limits, usually a daily limit. They'll say they'll pay up to so many dollars per day. Many of the traditional policies were $100 per day, and that was many, many years ago. It does defray the cost of care, but it won't pay for all of your care. These days, you need something north of $400 a day to be sure that you can pay for all of your care. Now, most of us would not need the full care paid for by insurance because in retirement we usually got some income, Social Security, sometimes a pension, etc. And so that can pay for some of the care without digging into the savings. Now, this long-term care insurance, most people do not have it. Most people do not have it. Most people have never even looked into it. The time to get it is when you're in your 30s or 40s. That's when it's affordable. That's when you can lock it in. And that's when you want to get it. Now, granted, that's also when you're going to be paying for it for the longest period of time. So imagine you're 40 and you might need nursing care when you're 85, or, and as the way things go, people are living longer and longer. Maybe people in the future won't need long-term care on average until they're almost 100. So you're going to be paying for that long-term care insurance for many, many years before you can use it. So something to consider. But I think everybody should look into long-term care insurance, because once you've had a diagnosis of Parkinson's disease or early onset Alzheimer's or anything like that, it's impossible to get. You can't get it. And when you get to be a certain age, it's just prohibitively expensive. You might be better off probably just paying for your care on your own. So, an illustration of before I go into this, there's a question. Let's see. Do you know what the odds are if someone in their 60s will need long-term care? There's different surveys, and none of them are 100% accurate, but the last ones I read say that if you reach 65, your chances are about 50-50 that you will, before you die, end up in a long-term care facility for some period of time. The average period is now over 2 years. Some people, pass early. Some people last longer than 2 years. But if you're mid-60s and still living, your chances are about 50-50 that you'll spend some time in a long-term care facility before you pass away. That's just statistical. Everybody's different. Long-term care insurance is separate from life insurance. That was another question. Well, there are long-term care policies that blend, actually it's the life insurance policies that blend long-term care into it. So they blurred the line. There's the traditional long-term care policy. That's just long-term care. But then there's a lot of policies these days that are life insurance policy, that if you need long-term care before you've passed away, they will pay out your death benefit for long-term care, but reduces how much your family gets upon your death, sometimes eliminates it completely. So you can have a hybrid policy, and some people find that those are the best policy for them. So what's the plan if you need long-term care? Well, here's an example of somebody. Let's say you have a $300,000 nest egg and a home. Let's say that's probably also about $300,000. But you need nursing expenses, and you happen to be fairly healthy, and you live a long time. So all $300,000 of your nest egg goes to the nursing home expense. And then you keep on living for a while, and you're on Medicaid now because the house doesn't count and you're able to qualify for Medicaid without selling the house. But the bill piles up, and the state keeps track of that. And then when you pass away, your home is recovered by the state. And so nothing goes to the kids in the end. This is more or less the government's plan for all of us if we need long-term care. Now, there are rules about how you can qualify for long-term care, and part of my job is to know those rules. We don't cheat the system. We don't do anything that's unethical or illegal. What we do is we use the rules for our benefit instead of for the state's benefit or for the nursing home's benefit. This does not have to be you and your family. This does not have to be your plan. This is the government's plan for you. This doesn't have to be your plan. Like I say, elder law, which I practice, focuses on knowing the rules. We don't hide anything from the government. What we do is we use the rules to our clients' advantages. So what's a smart plan? A smart plan is keep the house for the kids when you passed away instead of having it recovered by the estate recovery program. Keep the farm for the kids the same way, the business. Keep most of the money for your security while you're living. So if you can set aside money that's not counted, that your family can use for you for your security, that's also part of a good plan. And as much as you can, use Medicaid to pay for your care, even though you've set those other things aside. So one way to get rid of assets, and you have to keep in mind there's a 5-year look-back period, is to give them to your kids. So if you have kids, and this is most of the people that want to do this type of planning have kids that they want to leave things to, or they just want their kids to be able to control the assets instead of watching them dwindle. The problems with giving assets to your kids directly, say you give your house to your kids, is that if the child dies, now the house is going to belong to their kids or their spouse, worse. So you want your child's spouse owning your house and then getting remarried to someone else? Probably not. If your child has their own medical issues or needs Medicaid, or your child goes bankrupt because of medical problems or a bad economy, then your house is going to be all swept up in that bankruptcy or those debts. There's also capital gains tax problems. So when you finally pass away and the kids go to sell the house, they are going to have a big tax bill that they could have been avoided if you had gifted to a trust instead of gifting to the children directly. If you had set up an irrevocable trust, properly set up, now not every irrevocable trust works for this. It depends on the wording of the trust, and these trusts that we do are generally called MAPT, Medicaid Asset Protection Trust. And they are good in most states, including Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Illinois. There's still the 5-year look-back period, so anything that you transfer into the trust only is fully protected after it's been in there for 5 years. But it makes sense to put it in there earlier rather than later, obviously, because 5 years is 5 years. Once things are in there, they are protected for the family. Nobody, including the state or the nursing home, can make you take those things out and pay for your care with them. There are issues, though, and we'll talk about that. But when your children finally receive the house, if it's from an MAPT, the children don't have a capital gains tax issue, which in some cases, I just heard from a client about a month ago that their parents did some planning and the parents just gave them the house. And then after the parents had died, they sold the house and they had to pay about $30,000 in capital gains tax, which they thought was a decent deal, because they saved the house from the nursing home cost. However, they could have avoided all of that tax. The $30,000 would have not have been lost, not a penny of it, if they had planned with a trust, a Medicaid Asset Protection Trust, if it was drafted properly. Also, if your family is cooperative, you can get the assets back There's no problem with if one of your children goes into bankruptcy. There's no problems if they get sued. God forbid they run over somebody on the road and get sued and owe millions of dollars. Your house is not going to be in jeopardy. You can get the house back if needed, if your family cooperates. So pre-planning. If you are a fairly healthy person, and it's likely that you can last 5 years or more before you might need nursing care, then that's what we call pre-planning. We do some planning for you. We can help you split your $300,000 nest egg plus your house into 2 separate piles. One pile goes into the MAPT. Now that would be the house plus about $225,000, depending on your particular case. And then the rest of the assets, $75,000, just stays in your bank account, and you use it for whatever you need: home repairs, vacations, anything. And then you just add to it with your income until and unless you ever need long-term care. Then, after 5 years, let's say you need nursing care. I hope you don't, but if you do, then you and the $75,000 are going to visit the nursing home. The $75,000 will go with you, and it will be used for your care. Then the $225,000 plus your house is preserved during your lifetime so that the kids can take money out of there if they need to get you the extra things. Things like extra massages, extra care, extra vacations, let's say, travel. If you need to move from one place to another, there will be money there for you to utilize and not be dependent on others. And then when you pass away, the children get whatever is left out of that house plus the $225,000. Essentially, by pre-planning as opposed to not planning, your family has saved $525,000. Not a bad deal. There are also planning that can be done that we call crisis planning. And this is when somebody has not done pre-planning, or maybe has done some pre-planning, but now still has a lot of assets that are going to be lost soon because they need nursing care now. They need some sort of care, nursing care, assisted living care, memory care now, and they have assets that they want to protect. So in this case, we've got, let's say mom has a $300,000 nest egg plus a $300,000 home. What we do if mom needs to move into nursing facilities, we save about half. Okay, now it all depends on several factors, and this is not set in stone. These numbers here are just an example. When you split everything, you need to put a certain amount into an MAPT, the Medicaid Asset Protection Trust. And now this is going to cause you to have a penalty. Now, when I said the state cannot make you take anything out of that MAPT and pay for your care, the nursing home can't make you take it out of there. But what the state does is they say, okay, we can't make you take it out of there, but you are disqualified from receiving Medicaid for a certain period of time. Okay? So at this crisis, this particular plan, we essentially transferred the home, $300,000 plus $25,000, because we computed that's how much we needed, into the MAPT. And then we took the rest of it and bought a very specific type of annuity. These annuities, that only ones that work here are developed by people who know what they're doing, and they fit within the federal guidelines for rules that do not count as an asset. So now we've taken all the assets and made them either into a gift or a non-countable asset. These annuities are now counted as income. They're not a countable asset. So after you've done this, you're down below the $2,000 and you qualify for Medicaid except for the penalty period. And that's why we put this money in the annuity, the $275,000, because that is very carefully calculated to pay you every month just enough to keep you in the nursing home, so that pays you exactly through the penalty period that you have gained by giving that gift to the MAPT. So in this case, the MAPT gift is going to cost you about, let's just say, 35 months of penalty. The $275,000 we have calculated is what you need to pay you back every month until the end of that 35-month penalty period. And once the penalty period is over, the annuity's gone, so you've lost the $275,000, but you've gained Medicaid, and now the $325,000, including your house, and $25,000 is saved for the kids. You don't have to worry about any recovery after you've passed away. The kids just get what's left there. All right, now I'm not sure that I'm making a lot of sense. I'm talking kind of fast. These are complicated issues and complicated topics. So I want to just see what we've got for questions here. All right, at what age would you recommend starting pre-planning? That's a great question. So as soon as you've got certain things in your life, pre-planning is a good idea. I would say typically in the 60s, in your 60s. And what you need to have is typically children that you trust. At least one child that you really trust, because you have to hand over the keys to this MAPT to the child. You can also make multiple children co-trustees of this trust so that they work together and that both of them are necessary to manage it. So that's one thing that you should have before you do this. Another thing is have your real estate mortgage free or close to mortgage free, because the banks may have a problem with you putting a house in an MAPT because it's an irrevocable trust. The banks may have a problem with that if they don't prove it prior to doing that. So if you don't have a mortgage on the house, no problem. You don't have a bank to worry about. All right, another question. If a person has a revocable trust, does it offer the same protection? Unfortunately, revocable trusts before August 1st of 2014 used to protect a home. Your home could be protected within the trust. You didn't have to sell it before you got Medicaid, and then upon your death, it went to your heirs, and the state did not have this enhanced recovery program that it has now. But the answer right now is in Wisconsin and most other states with enhanced recovery powers, the home is not protected in a revocable trust, and you can't design a revocable trust to protect these assets, unfortunately. So all of these MAPTs, these Medicaid Asset Protection Trusts, are irrevocable trusts. All right, so that's about all I wanted to talk about today. So a little illustration. If you don't plan or you plan poorly, you could end up living in a cardboard box. If you plan well, you may have Alzheimer's and not know exactly where you are, but you're more likely to be happy and well taken care of. All right, another question. If the bulk of the nest egg is in a retirement account, are you able to place these assets in an MAPT, or would it make sense to do so? That is a great question. So, depending on whether you are married or single, I'll talk about each of those. IRAs, 401ks, 403bs, any of that alphabet soup of qualified retirement money cannot go into an MAPT. So in crisis plans, what we do is we have to cash those out, and you pay the taxes on them. So you lose the tax, but you gain the protection. So yeah, the answer is no, they cannot. Those accounts need to be owned by an individual, the person who contributed to them during their lifetime. So unfortunately, you can't protect those in that way, like in a pre-plan. If it's a couple, one thing that I didn't mention it's good to mention right now is you've got the needy spouse, and then you've got the community spouse. So the needy spouse needs the nursing home, the community spouse stays at home and they're worried about their assets. The community spouses, IRAs, and 401ks and retirement plans are exempt in Wisconsin. You don't have to count them. They can stay. You can keep all million or whatever, however much you have in that IRA, you can keep for the community spouse if it's their IRA. Now, if it's the needy spouse's IRA, now you've got a problem because it's not exempt. It's countable as all the assets that have to be counted. There are ways to convert those so that the community spouse can end up with the advantages of the needy spouse's IRA. But that's part of a crisis plan. So once the community spouse needs Medicaid, then we would flip the switch on this crisis plan and use another type of that specialized annuity to get the assets to the community spouse. Now, during that process, all of the assets have to come out of the retirement plan protection or the retirement plan category, and so that taxes are going to have to be paid sometimes over a few months and sometimes over several years. It depends on the annuity and how long you want to allow those assets to come back to the well spouse or the community spouse. Okay, great question. All right, any other issues that anybody wants to talk about? There's a lot of things that we haven't talked about. It's taken me years to learn all this stuff, and maybe even longer to try to talk about it in a way that people can understand. But if you are curious, Wisconsin has actually a fairly good handbook, and it's published online. It's changed fairly regularly. It's called the MEH, or Medicaid Eligibility Handbook. And all you have to do is Google Wisconsin MEH, and it'll be at the top of your search terms. And then you can look, and it talks about financial eligibility for Medicaid and non-financial eligibility for Medicaid, and divestment, and what's a divestment and what's not divestment, gifting and penalty periods and all of that. But I would suggest, before you take this on, that you consult a person who is familiar with Medicaid planning and elder law, because making a wrong step, especially early in the process, and doing something could cost a lot. Medicaid crisis planning is not cheap, but compared to the amount that you and your family can save, it is a bargain. It's a really great bargain. And just the tax savings of gifting to an MAPT, gifting a house to an MAPT instead of gifting it outright to the children is well worth many times what it costs to do this type of planning. I see that Laura has shared one of my videos on Medicaid eligibility. Not sure exactly what's in that video, but I have several videos on YouTube about Medicaid and Medicaid eligibility, and I encourage you to take a look at those. Fascinating stuff. And I hope that the Boogeyman, though we all see the Boogeyman out there and see that we may be affected by this Boogeyman, knowing more and having an advocate on your side make the Boogeyman a bit less frightening, I hope. Okay, so that's the end of the presentation. I really want to thank everybody who showed up. I do appreciate your attention. We will get this video up. It'll be available on Facebook, and we'll also put it on the YouTube channel so that people can look at it later. And I do encourage you, if you would like to learn more about this, email us or give us a call. The email, you can email my intake person, whose name is Laura Hamden, and her email is laura.hamden, that's HAMDAN, at friendly.law. That's friendly, just the word friendly, and it's .law, LAW. or you could call us. We have several numbers, but our number that gets you to the main directory is 608 268 5751. Thanks again for joining us, and I'm going to see about turning this off. Have a great day.